Sorry for that. So, first of all, again, good evening to all of you. And now the prelims are over. The question is what to do and how to do. So, here we are with the strategy to talk about number of things. Today, we'll be talking about the cutoff. We'll talk about the post prelims in general, how should be the preparation should be done. Also, we'll talk about GA strategy in general and paper 1 in particular I'll be talking about. Also, I'll talk about the GS geography strategy. Then I'll also discuss with you the 500 plus program for GS which we are launching from this year. And also we'll talk about the people who won't be clearing the exam, what should be the strategy for them. So all of these we are going to discuss in the next 15 minutes. So let us, without wasting time, talk about the cutoff. Now there is lots of ambiguity about what would be the cutoff this year, because you know the papers of this year were unprecedented papers. We haven't seen such kind of papers in UPSC, and definitely if you talk about, I would also say that this is one of the toughest papers in the history of UPSC, because there has been a kind of change in pattern in the way the questions were framed, and you all must have heard about it, and in fact many of you would have given also. So cutoff, as we talk about, is expected to be on the lower side, but what are the parameters essentially which are determining the cutoff? To understand this, you have to understand what are the nature of the questions which are asked in the prelims examination. So I always categorize the questions into three categories. I always say that if you talk about the questions, they are belonging to three type of categories. Either they are direct questions. Direct questions are the questions which you have studied from your standard books like Lakshmikant and others, and they are directly being asked. So such kind of questions, they are easy to solve, they are more direct type of questions. Then there are tricky type of questions where you have to think essentially and then answer them. To take an example from this year geography question, you might have seen one of the questions was talking about the temperature difference between the continents and the ocean. So again, that is a type of question which is a kind of tricky kind of question. Then there are exceptional questions where there might be some factual data which might be asked and we are not aware. They are also not to be found in the standard books which we are studying. Like for example, take the case of the honeybee question this year which was asked, and it is something which is more of a GK, and we might not have covered it that kind of wide coverage. Okay. So there are three category of questions. Now, if we look into the 2021 year, so in 2021 year, the distribution of the questions in the paper was something along this lines, that there were around 39 direct questions, there were around 35 tricky questions, and there were around exceptional questions which were 26. So you can understand that these form the majority. Actually, this is, I always believe that these are the category of questions which get you selected. So ultimately the exceptional questions were 26. So the cutoff, we saw that it was 87.54 for the general category we are talking about. Then in 2022, the ratio was somewhat on similar line. Direct questions weightage little bit reduced. Tricky questions on the other hand, there was little bit increase in that. There was little one question, if you talk about, there was shortfall in the exceptional category. What we found, that since the overall weightage of this increased, the cutoff also basically increased. Now we are in this year 2023, and you can see that there has been a drastic change in this year paper, and what we are finding is around 24 questions were from the direct category, and tricky questions, if you talk about, were from around 41. So in total 65 questions were there from this category, and can you imagine, there was almost in the category of exceptional questions, there was increase of about 10 marks, or sorry, 10 questions. So then definitely this means that this year paper was on the tougher side, and the cutoff, if you talk about, should be on the lower side. So going just by these figures, we can say that the cutoff will somewhere should be between 80 to 85 should be the cutoff which should be this year. If I add further uncertainties which were there, like you might have seen the CSAT paper. CSAT paper was one of the toughest papers asked till date. And I have personally met so many students who are not clearing the exam just because of the CSAT paper. They have done the paper 1 well, but still they are failing in the CSAT. So I believe that because of that, the cutoff can be even little bit lower than this. In fact, I sincerely feel that the cutoff will be somewhere around here between 80 to 82. So this is going to be the numbers where the cutoff should be hovering around. Maybe I am not able to understand there because there are many other factors also. It would be very difficult to objectively calculate them. Like for example, this was a year when students were also shocked. And because of them being shocked, ultimately you can understand you become depressed during the papers, and once you are not confident enough, ultimately many of the things which you know, that also you will not be able to answer. So that would have also played a part. So there is a possibility that the cutoff can even go beyond this, but we can say that it should be somewhere around it. Okay, so that is the range which I believe that the cutoff should be. This means that anyone who is getting in the range of, I would say, 75 to 85 should be seriously preparing for the examination. You should not waste any moment, any day, and you should straight away start preparing for the exam. Because we never know. There were many questions which were dicey, which were doubtful. Like for example, I was giving the example of the contrast of temperature between the oceans and the continents. So it was a general statement which was mentioned, they didn't mention specifically. Okay, so if you look into within the tropics, actually the contrast is more in the summer. But if you go beyond the tropics, then the contrast becomes more in the winter. So which of the answers UPSC will be taking, it is again, it depends upon the examiner who has set the paper. So there might be 2-3 questions whose answer might vary from the keys which we have given or other institutes have given. So definitely, even if you are here 75, then also there is a chance that 1 or 2 questions or 3 questions can increase and you might find your name in the list. The day result comes, you should not be in a position where you regret that you have wasted your time, and those 20 days, 15-20 days, they are going to be the very, very crucial. You talk to any of the selected students and they'll tell you that they didn't waste that period. Okay, so these 15-20 days are very, very crucial. Now, so moving on to now what should be the strategy post prelims? Now, how ultimately we should be preparing for the mains examination which is going to commence on 18th of September. So it is very clear that we have number of, if you talk about months, we have the month of June, we have the month of July, we have the month of August, and half of September. Half of the September. So basically, I really believe that if we take the month of June, the month of June should be devoted to a large chunk of the preparation strategy. Should revolve, like for example, we know that we have to study our GS and we have to study our optional. So in the month of June, we can little bit tilt our preparation strategy in the favor of the optional. Why I am saying so? Because you can understand that for, I believe that most of you would have stopped your optional preparation somewhere around the end of February. That means there were months, March, April and May, almost 3 months where you didn't at all studied your optionals. So it is the right time where you start revising your optionals again. And if in the first month we are able to complete at least 50 to 60% of the optional chunk, that will give us an edge. And this is something which we have to desire for, we have to plan for, and we have to achieve. Okay, so here we can tilt the strategy little bit in favor of optional. When I'm saying that the strategy should be tilted little bit in the favor of optional, I'm definitely here meaning that it doesn't mean ki you will just study the optional. Remember, there is also law of diminishing returns. If you just put too much hours in something, you'll get bored and the output will ultimately decline. Okay, so basically, if suppose I was to devote 4 hours and 4 hours here, normally I can say that instead I'll devote 5 hours here and just 3 hours here in GS. So likewise, what you have to do, you have to essentially plan your month of June. Then once we are back in July, we should shift back to the balanced preparation, where at least I am giving 4 hours for my GS and 4 hours for my optional preparation. Okay, so this is something where how you should be planning. Similarly, if you talk about August, again the same thing, and at least till the first week of September, this ratio should be maintained. From the second week of September, because now the prelims will be mains will be very near, and the first papers you will be writing is definitely that of the language and others, and GS papers would be the first papers you will be writing. Then the strategy should heavily in the last second and third week of September, it should be heavily tilted towards the GS. Okay, because we want to make sure that the first papers we attend very well, so that we have lots of confidence. And believe me, the first papers, if they go well, we will be full with confidence, and the other papers will also go good. Okay, so this is the some kind of general strategy which we essentially have to follow. Okay, then so this is a kind of macro schedule you have to plan. In optional also, if I just talk about the optional, in optional, in the initial months, like in the month of June, what you do, you focus upon the areas which are your fear areas, where you believe that you are not so much prepared. Okay, so that is the area where you will be essentially focusing upon in the month of June. And from there, from July onwards, July, and I would say this is somewhere around mid-August. And if I just put a date here, I would say 14th of August is the perfect date to plan for it, because 15 अगस्त कि 15 अगस्त आज़ादी का दिन होता है, तो 15 अगस्त को हमें आज़ादी मिल जानी चाहिए, मेंटल फ्रीडम चाहिए कि हमने 15 अगस्त तक अपना पूरा का पूरा जो एक इटरेशन था उसको कंप्लीट कर लिया है. एंड एक इटरेशन जब मैं कह रहा हूं तो डेफिनेटली देयर इज रिवीजन, मल्टीपल रिवीजन्स ऑल्सो, डेली बेसिस पर, वीकली बेसिस पर मैंने किया होगा जो भी वॉट एवर आई वुड हैव स्टडीड. ओके, सो दिस इज समथिंग विच essentially I will be a kind of strategy I should be following. Okay, or if suppose for optional, if you have joined some test series or some kind of enrichment program, or in our case like geography optional there is a 500 plus program, you can definitely follow the schedule of these. That can be beneficial. Okay, but have a schedule and make sure that this is the target date, the cutoff date when you are finishing your optionals. Okay, completely, that you become ultimately confident that as I talked about the mental freedom, that mental freedom you have got. Similarly, if you talk about the GS, I sincerely believe I can divide GS into two parts. Okay, and if you talk about these two parts, one category of topics are if you talk about the major chunk, the major topics, and the second category of topics are the minor topics which have to be prepared. So I would say when you are making the slots, you make the slots in such a manner that you are completing one major topic, then one minor topic, then again one major topic, then again one minor topic. So at least this kind of thing which we have to do. So like for example, suppose if I am talking about geography, then there is a related topic like environment and ecology, disaster management can be done together. Similarly, if I am talking about a major topic, almost 75 marks are coming from it, Indian society. So again, I can complete a minor topic along with it, like the social justice. So likewise, one major topic and one minor topic. If I suppose make a slot of 15 days, I should target one major topic and one minor topic to be completed. So this is the way I think that if you prepare for the GS, it will work wonders for you. Okay. अब देखो, the thing is, if I just start with some minor topics, then what is the problem is, initially when we are starting, we are generally tending to be slow. हमेशा जब हम कोई भी चीज स्टार्ट करते हैं तो वो हमेशा स्टार्टिंग में ये एक नेचुरल फिनोमेना है कि वो एक इनर्शिया होता है एंड एक्सेलरेशन आने में थोड़ा टाइम लगता है. सो वी विल बी स्लोअर. सो इफ आई स्टार्ट विथ लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर मैंने टारगेट किया कि ये माइनर टॉपिक्स को ही करता हूं, तो उसमें प्रॉब्लम बस यही है कि हम उस तरह से स्पीड के साथ कर नहीं पाएंगे जिस स्पीड के साथ इनको किया जा सकता है. मीन दीज टॉपिक्स लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ आई टॉक अबाउट एनवायरमेंट इकोलॉजी, ideally if you talk about 2 to 3 days are enough, and you should not devote, because you have to look into the weightage of the questions which are being asked in the examination. So 2 questions are being asked, one 10 marker and one 15 marker. So why I will be spending more time here? So likewise I have to allot the time and I have to plan how I will be essentially completing. Okay, so that is basically, if you talk about how I will be, this is how my macro plan should be made. Okay, now coming to the daily schedule, ideally as I told you, the daily schedule should be such that in a day you should divide your day into 4 parts. Okay, and I would say that these 4 parts should look something like this. So there is one part which is your optional, one part if you talk about is some GS core, and when I am talking about this core, it will be the major and the minor topics which are there. Alternatively you should do them, and there is the current affairs. If you talk about the 4th part, I'll explain what is this 4th part. So my day should look something like this. 4 hours I am devoting here, 4 hours I am devoting here, and if you talk about the 3 hours I am devoting here. Now out of this 4 hours which I am devoting here, at least the ratio should be something like this. 2.5 hours, suppose I have studied something, 1.5 hours if you talk about should go for the revision of this. Okay, I know that you have already, most of you would have prepared your optionals, for example, and even the core areas. So this is also a kind of revision you will be doing. Okay, but still again the same thing which you have studied within 24 hours, you have to study that. And not only 24 hours, your cycle of revision should be like 24 hours, next in 7 days, next in 21 days. So this 1.5 hours of revision essentially should include all these things, all these 3 iterations which you have to do. Okay, so that is how your strategy should be planned. In fact, within this half an hour, I'll also tell you that at least you devote 20 to 30 minutes of your time for practicing answer writing. That is a very, very important thing. Write at least one answer for optional, at least one answer for GS every day. In fact, what you can do, you can plan, you are writing one answer and you are making framework of 2-3 more. Frameworking requires less time. It is also kind of answer writing. Just what we are doing it very fast and short, just to get a hang of solving the questions and answers. Okay. So by this, within 30 minutes, suppose you are devoting, you'll be able to cover 4 to 5 questions and answers. Okay. If you just think about only that I am writing full answers, then you will be able to cover less number of questions, which is definitely not the idea. We have to try to cover maximum number of questions and answers as much as I can. Okay. So that is basically how it should go. And same thing applies for the GS as well. Suppose if I am devoting 2 hours or 2.5 hours for the study, then within 24 hours, it should be revised. 7 days again the revision, then 21 days again the 2 hours which are there. This should be devoted for these cyclic revisions which are there. Okay. And along with the answer writing. Same thing goes for the current affairs. Here also you can divide 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours. Okay. So this is how your daily schedule would look like. As I told you, little bit imbalance can be there in the month of June. June is bit of a month, we can say, where you have a little bit of freedom to alter the schedule according to your own needs. But starting from the July month, this is something which cannot be altered at all. Okay. So this is how your daily schedule, if you talk about, should be looking like. So we talked about the optional, how we have to prepare, we have talked about the GS. Now coming to the essay. Now what very important thing you have to understand is, I have seen like in the optional, students are working so much hard. They are devoting so much of the time to increase that 30-40 marks. Can you imagine? We are neglecting one area where we can increase that same marks, 30-40 marks, with almost 1/5 the time that we will be otherwise putting in the optional. So why not do that? So this is something of an area which is very important. If you have seen the mark sheet this year, you might have seen most of the students who have got selected, these are the students who have also got good marks in essay, 130s. They have got their marks. So we have to make sure that this becomes, it is not based just on luck, it becomes a kind of science. We know how to write essays, we have practiced them a lot, so that in the examination we are able to do it faster. Okay. So if you talk about the essay, if I was suppose preparing, what I'll do simply is, I'll make 2 days of the week. One is Saturday and other one is Sunday. And I will devote about around 2 hours and 2 hours here, out of which 1.5 hours and 1.5 hours. Each of these days, what I'll do, I'll be writing at least one essay, complete one essay I'll be writing. And you know, the recent times, the trend has been that they've asked lots of, or mostly the essays which are asked, they are very philosophical. So ultimately you have to develop ability how to ultimately understand such type of essays, how to decode them, how to essentially write relevant material on them. Okay. And believe me, it is also something which will come by practice. Even if you have a fear of writing such philosophical essays, you will understand that how we break, how we decode the statements and ultimately produce very beautiful essays out of that. Okay. So that will essentially come by practice. So make sure that Saturdays and Sundays are devoted for this. Okay. So this is something which is a general strategy that you should be following post prelims. Then if you talk about GS1, as I told you, GS1 general strategy we'll talk about. And if I talk about GS1 general strategy, you'll see that many of the students who have got selected, their marks in GS paper 1 have been at least 100 plus, and somewhere between, I would say, between 100 to 110 is the average score of the selected students. So at least this much marks I need in paper 1. Now, how to get it? I'll have to look into little bit of the breakup of how the paper has come. So if I look into GS paper 1, you know that there are 3 parts of GS paper 1. One part is essentially history, other part is Indian society, and the other part, if you talk about, is geography. So there are 3 parts, and just for the average, for the sake of it, if I, for example, I have given you here the geography, the number of marks allotted to geography each year, you can see that there has been lots of variabilities, but एक average हम मान लेते हैं, and this average is around 100 marks. Some years have been where it has been lower than this, but if you look into the past 3 years, it has been actually increasing the weightage of geography. Okay, so if you talk about, I'll just give this average of 100 for the geography part of GS paper 1. If you look into the average of Indian society, it has been around 75 marks. And if you talk about history, again, it has been about 75 marks. So this has been the distribution of marks in paper 1. Now, if we also look into the nature of the questions which have been asked, one thing is very clear. History has been on a more difficult side. The questions, if you talk about, they are highly analytical questions. So we are presented with a scenario where the questions in history, they are very analytical, they are very in depth. There only we are finding, and we are first time reading such questions, and we have to make their answers. So what actually happens, it becomes little bit difficult to score very high in this part. Same thing if you look into Indian society, here also it is a very diverse area, and here also if you look into the, I would simply say it is difficult to moderately difficult. Okay, and here also lots of analytical questions have been asked in the past. Although society is not so much like history, but still there has been a more subjective analytical questions which have been asked in Indian society as well. Okay. Now coming to geography, one grace we have here is the area of geography. And if you have looked into the questions which have been asked in geography, geography has been a more objective type. There has been more of the questions which have been asked belonging to only what and why category. Such type of questions, they are much easier to answer. What happens actually in such type of questions, the chances that your answer matches with the model answer of the examiner is very high. In history, the questions which are asked, in society, the questions which are asked, there 1 plus 1 may be 1, it can be 2, it can be 3. But in geography, the questions which are asked, here 1 plus 1 is 2, and this is 2 for you, 2 for the examiner as well. Okay, so this is the difference. So one area where I can be little bit having a greater focus or very strong focus, I would say, is this area of geography. And suppose if I am able to get out of this 100 marks, because there is little bit objectivity here, if I am able to score 50% of the marks out of the allotted 100, can you imagine? Already half of my work is done. Now out of 150 marks which are there here, this entire is 150 marks, I have to make sure that at least I get I can get 50 to 75. If I get, even if I am on the lower side, then also I am reaching 100. If I am on the higher side, well and good. Okay, so this is something, this is the nature of paper 1. You have to understand, and accordingly you have to very well prepare. Okay, so that is a general strategy which you should be following in the GS part. You invest time accordingly. So what happens many times, because we know in history there is number of areas. We know that there is modern history is there. We know there is the area of culture. We know there is post independence history. We know that there is world history. And because of that, many times what students are doing, they are allotting too much time to history. It should not be done. Because if you look, for example, modern history, already you have studied well for the prelims, one thing. And the number of questions, even in mains, if you see, hardly one or max 2 questions are being asked from modern history. In fact, you will find there is more questions from culture these days compared to modern history. So, accordingly what I have to do, I have to give weightage, how much time I should be giving, and I really believe this should be the objective criteria of determining how much of the time I will be giving to each of the areas of the GS. Okay, so that is how I will be preparing my GS paper 1. Now coming to geography, which is my area. So as you can understand, at least if you talk about 100 marks have been there. If we look into the past 3 years trend, there has been incremental scenario in case of geography. So in 2020 there were 100 marks, in 2021 there were 110 marks, and in 2022 there were 115 marks. So definitely what you have to understand, you have to prepare geography in the same manner. Now going to a more detailed analysis of how we will be preparing geography, how we should be preparing geography, we have to look into the syllabus, and we have to correlate it with the previous year questions which have been asked. I have grouped, there are 4 topics in the syllabus. I have grouped these into 3 categories, and this is basically the general physical geography, this is I simply say human geography, and this is I say contemporary geography. So 3 areas we can see that there are questions coming from 3 areas in geography. Now if I look into the ratio of how the questions are being asked, we will be finding that maximum number of questions are being asked from the human geography. And in human geography there are 2 parts. One is the topic of resource, and second is the topic of industry, which includes the primary, secondary and tertiary industries, all the 3 categories. That means it includes your agriculture. So maximum number of questions have been asked from human geography. And then if you talk about comes the contemporary geography, from where large number of questions have been asked. The area that essentially we talked about, this one, the important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activities, cyclones, etc., geographical features and their location, changes in critical geographical features including water bodies and ice caps, and in the flora and fauna, and the effects of such changes. So this is the area from where large number of questions essentially have been asked, and then it is your general physical geography. So when we are preparing, accordingly we will be also giving weightage to the geography, preparation of geography. So this is how you should be preparing your essentially the part of geography. And so human geography, you must have studied in your classes or from wherever, whatever be the source of your preparation. You make sure you think, you look into the previous year questions, you think from those areas, and also look into what is in essentially news. Some kind of resources may be in news, some kind of, if you talk about like for example energy scenario, etc., will be in the 500 classes, will be talking about in very detail many of these things. Same thing if you talk about the contemporary geography, like for example, there was the issue of Joshimath. In fact, in recent times, very, very recent times, I'm talking about 2 weeks back, there was news that the area around the Indira Gandhi airport in Delhi, it is sinking. And what is the reason for this sinking? Excessive withdrawal of the groundwater. This means that, for example, this year, the topic of land subsidence, and if I go to a broader topic of that, ultimately, the topic of landslides, the topic of mass wasting. So from this, I can even think of what topic might be important. So from that, I can think of maybe a question can be asked from mass wasting topic. Okay, so that is, I will look into that part of the contemporary geography. And physical geography, I believe, because you have just now prepared for prelims, it will be more like a revision for you to prepare this part. Okay, so this is how I will be devoting my time in the preparation of geography. Okay, you should never, I have seen, because the classes are also doing that, so the students also tend to do that. They pay more attention to this part and comparatively less attention to this part. We should not be doing it. Okay, so this is how it should be essentially prepared, geography. Now moving on to the next thing, how we should be essentially doing what will be our strategy, guidance strategy this year. We have essentially given you now a program which I had promised my student I will be bringing, and if you talk about this program is the GS 500 plus program. You know that I have been taking this 500 plus for geography optional. In fact, I proudly call myself as the innovator of the 500 plus program, and they are very famous for the optional. Similar type of methodology, what I am going to do is I will be bringing in the GS. Once my 500 plus program for the optional became popular, many people tried to replicate it in GS, but they were not successful, because there is a logic how I made my optional 500 plus. The nature of GS is little bit different from the optional. I have made sure that those fundamental logics are applicable here also with some difference, because you can understand GS is a different ball game compared to the optional. So here our 500 plus program is designed, and this 500 plus program, what is the basic, if you talk about the key features of this 500 plus program. So here we will be covering the entire syllabus through 500 plus questions and answers. Okay. In GS, the syllabus is not so much well defined as it is defined in optionals. Still, based on the wisdom and the knowledge that we teachers have, we will be making the breakup of the topics, and we have divided the topics into those where there is very high ROI, then there is where there is medium ROI, and there are subtopics where there is low ROI. So in this program, what we are targeting is those areas which have generally, based on the previous year questions, there is very high ROI, okay, and to some extent medium ROI, particularly those which have been in news because of certain reasons. Okay, so such type of 500 plus questions and answers we will be doing through 30 sessions. In fact, 30 sessions and 10 tests. So test series is also part and parcel of this program. Okay, so we will be covering those 500 questions with respect to 30 sessions and the 10 test discussions which will be there. So the entire coverage will be through question and answers. Also, this means that if we are doing it through question and answers, we'll in the class itself will frame many of the questions, most in fact 500 questions and answers. We'll see what kind of introductions will be written, variety of type of introductions we'll talk about, what and the way the main body should be written, what can be the ideal conclusions for all these 500 type of questions. Okay, we'll also look into those areas. Also, how to enrich your answers, how to make sure that extra edge you can get from the others by including good diagrams, by including examples, by even including case studies. Okay, all those things we will try to cover here. So that is part and parcel of the program. Also, if you talk about one thing we are promising here is that every minute that you will be spending in the class, every minute, it will be productive for you, because the way we are choosing the questions, the way we are choosing the topics which will be dealt, they have very high ROI, directly or indirectly. So even if suppose we are talking about an area, suppose we are talking about in environment ecology some topic, ultimately what will happen, that will become that knowledge can be a base where you can use it other areas as well. So we have made sure that whatever time you spend here, it will be beneficial to you. Okay, that is something which is very unique of this program. As I told you, there will be 10 tests, 5 flexible modular tests, and there will be 5 tests which will include one essay test for you. So 5 comprehensive tests, paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, paper 4, 1 and 1 essay. So that makes it to 10 tests. Okay, and we have designed the test in such a manner that every 2 weeks you are writing essentially a test. Why we are making it every 2 weeks? Because we assume that you are also writing your optional tests. So the idea is that every week you write tests. Alternatively, 1 week you write optional test, other week you write GS test. So 1 week optional, then other week your GS test. So that is how the tests we have designed, and within the tests we will be giving the copies within 5 working days. Also the teachers, if you talk about the teachers who are associated, they are subject experts, and these teachers will also be available with you for the mentorship. So once, even during the classes, if you have some problem, if you have written answers, you want to get them checked, the teachers will be available. If you talk about even after the test, you want to show your copies, or will be, in fact, in the test will be having, test is like compulsory mentorship. So there will be looking into the copies, but even without that, if you want to show your answers, you are welcome. So the teachers will be there, the time will be allotted every day for the teachers. So every day at least one of these teachers will be available to help you out. Okay, so this is how the 500 plus program has been designed. In fact, if I just look into the schedule, I have tried to follow here the same thing which I was professing you, that we have to take one main topic and at least 1 or 2 minor topics. So that is what we have tried to do. In every module we have followed this. So at least 1 or 2 main topics and a minor topic. So like for example, in the first module itself, we are dealing with geography and society, the main topics, and 1 minor topic, that is social justice, which will be done. Similarly, in module 2, we are dealing with Indian polity, which is a major topic, and IR, which is a major topic. Then along with that, a minor topic of governance will be covered. Similarly, if you talk about in module 3, there is the part of history, which will be covered along with a minor topic of environment ecology, disaster management, it will be covered. Same thing if you talk about in module 4, there is the ethics, and there are 2 classes related with Indian economy. We have tried to keep Indian economy on little bit, most of the topics of paper 3 later on, because you know they are more current oriented. So we'll try to make sure that the entire updation which is required for the examination is done, which we are dealing, the questions which we are dealing in the classes. Okay, and same thing in module 5, there is all those topics of paper 3 which will be essentially covered. And you have seen, if you have seen the paper of GH, you might have seen that there has been, in recent times, there has been a kind of change in the trend. So earlier what used to happen, the questions were more used to be current affair based. Now what has happened, the questions are current affair based, but the actual questions are more about the, if you talk about the traditional areas. So they are mixing now current and traditional. So they are asking the core understanding based on your current affairs. So same way here also what we are doing, we will be making those questions in such a manner. Okay. In fact, I'll just give you an example, like what will be the way, what will be the methodology, how we will be dealing in the classes. So the methodology is simple. Suppose I take a topic of cyclone. So I will devote around 15 to 20 minutes, or sorry, 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes for this topic of cyclone. And how further the division will be done? 5 minutes first I will spend in just making sure very fast revising the basics in 5 minutes. That is the first thing we'll do with every topic. Then we will look into some of the questions which are the probable questions, and for this we will look into some of the current affairs, the news items which would have been there, and on the basis of, we'll combine this basics and this current affair knowledge to essentially solve these questions. Okay, so this is how basically we will be moving. So like if you talk about cyclones, there are two types of cyclones, tropical cyclones and the temperate cyclones. If you talk about tropical cyclones, what are the basic preconditions for their formation? So there are 5 to 6 preconditions for their formation. We'll just quickly revise. Then we'll talk about, if you talk about other things like what is the form, how they are formed. Then if you talk about what is their impact, okay, what is their distribution. Then same thing, temperate cyclones, how they are formed, what are the stages of their formation. So the basics, very quick revision, and then moving on to the current affairs based item. Like for example, in recent times you must have heard about the Fujiwara effect, or you must have heard about the recurving of the cyclones, or you must have heard about for example the bomb cyclones. Okay, so such subtopics which have been in news, will list them down. On the basis of that, the questions have been made, and then we'll see how the questions can be solved by combining this basics and the current affairs. Okay, so that is how we'll be covering that cyclones, for example, in this 20 to 30 minutes. So there are certain topics which have very high ROI, and we'll try to make sure, like for example, there have been questions where they asked about, like volcanism question, where they asked about some recent volcanic events. So when we will be talking about this part, what will happen? Those recent volcanic events, because I found many of the students who did not knew which were the more recent volcanic events which would have taken place. So we'll take those current affairs of each of these topics where there is very high probability of being asked. Same thing if you look into landslides. If you look into the previous year questions, you will be finding at least 3 times they've asked landslides. So we should know which were the most recent landslides which have occurred, okay, and what were their causes. So likewise, we will be moving on, and this will be replicated for all of the topics. Definitely, depending upon the nature of the topic, some topics have a kind of different nature, like ethics is little bit different. So there the philosophy will be little bit changing, but overall the philosophy is based upon what? Objectivity, coverage. We are covering not only the current, we are also trying to make you revise the basics as well, very, very fast. Okay, so this is how we will be doing in the 500 plus program of GS, and the 500 plus program is starting from 6th of June. First few classes will be open classes, so all of you are invited to come and sit and see how the classes will be. Okay, so that is about the 500 plus classes of general studies, and I hope that this session was useful for you. For those of you who were unable to clear this time, or who are getting low scores, remember that UPSC is not the end, or maybe you have another attempt. So you should not lose hope, and you should keep on preparing. I'll just tell you one thing. Remember that around 13,000 students would be selected who will be writing mains. Now, out of that, how many will actually get final selection? It will be less than 1,000 who will be finally selected. That means there will be 12,000 students who will be again writing the mains next year. Out of those 12,000 students, let us assume कि 2,000 ऐसे थे जिनका attempt खत्म हो गया. फिर भी there are 10,000 of them who will be going to appear next year, जो अगले साल दे रहे हैं. और क्योंकि उन्होंने इस पीरियड को, ये जो तुम्हारा जून से लेकर के जो सितंबर तक का पीरियड है, बहुत मेहनत से, बहुत लगन से उसको पढ़ा है, they will be ahead of you. So even in next cycle, they will be ahead of you. Do you want that? So stop wasting time and in fact get ready. In fact, if you really feel that you have covered the classes, etc., you can even think of joining the tests. You can even think of joining such enrichment programs which will be helping you out, which will make you disciplined, because you have to make sure that you study during this period with discipline. Okay, then only there will be a rise next year. Otherwise, the same story will be repeated next year as well. Okay, so that's it for today, friends, and we will be meeting on 6th of June. Before that, there are several such kind of orientation lectures planned by each of the faculties who will be dealing in the 500 plus. So tomorrow also at 5 p.m. Tomorrow there is the ethics orientation taken by Atul Garg sir. So be tuned tomorrow at 5 p.m. Till then, goodbye.